You're listening to an Ono Media podcast.
Good morning, and thanks for joining me for Rise in Crime, your morning caffeine hit all about crime. I'm Mama Jules, and today we have jewelry heists and poison candy and systemic prison abuse to cover. So let's work our way from the last crime mentioned to the first crime mentioned. We've talked about potential systemic failures here before, and the reality is it's still happening. The wounds that have been created by those systemic failures were on full display over the last few weeks in Marcy, New York, as the trial for the murder of prison inmate Robert Brooks concluded on October 20th. Now, some would say the wound was ripped open further and salt was dumped in by the bucket loads. Others believe the judicial system worked appropriately. You guys get to decide. Let's dive into the December of 2024 murder of Robert Brooks. Now, Marcy, New York is a small hamlet in upstate New York, a town of 9,000 people that barely resembles the hustle and bustle of Manhattan. Marcy is a place of rolling hills. There's dairy farms and historic routes stretching back to the development of the Erie Canal. Utica, the nearest larger city, which is just a short drive away, is finding a foothold in a new world where manufacturing has become less prevalent. In December of that year, 2024, snow already dusted the cold winter ground and holiday lights twinkled with hopes of joyous holiday celebrations. That hope and serenity of the season did not translate to the Marcy Correctional Facility. The medium security state prison opened in 1988 on the grounds of a former psychiatric center. Don't even get me started on the spirits that might be surrounding this prison. We'll leave all that up to the podcast that Peyton does called Into the Dark. But this state prison houses around 1,000 men, surrounded by razor wire, watchtowers, and vast fields that isolate the prison from the outside world. Inside the walls, well, it's exactly as you would expect. It's overcrowded, often understaffed. There's file cabinets with sections dedicated to reports of abuse, and racial divides within the housed inmates and also the staff, which can lead to unchecked violence. Former inmates and staff have described Marcy as a prison, quote, run by the mob, where some guards wield power with little oversight, and incidents of brutality are too alarmingly common. In 2024 alone, New York prisons saw multiple deaths under suspicious circumstances, shining a bright light on the perceived lack of correctional accountability. In this fortress of concrete and steel, well, we bring on a felon who left in a body bag. Robert Brooks Sr. was born in Utica, just down the road from the prison, in 1981. Robert was raised among the working class, and reports of his early years paint a picture of a charismatic man who found himself in trouble far too often. Fighting the battle of urban poverty, Robert became the father to a son in the early 2000s. Loving his son became his focal point, but that role of fatherhood was not enough to steer Robert away from trouble. In 2016, when Robert was just 34 years old, he became involved in a violent altercation that ended with Robert stabbing his girlfriend in the chest, neck, and torso. He was convicted of first-degree assault and sentenced to 12 years in prison, with a potential early parole release date of mid-2026. Now, almost all of his time served had not been at Marcy. Robert was housed at the Mohawk Correctional Facility. That was until he had a week of bad events in early December of 2024. Now, the reports here vary a little bit, but it seems that one assault against Robert took place when he was attacked in his cell by another inmate. Then days later, a second assault occurred when another inmate placed a heavy object in a sock, most likely a lock, kind of like the combination kind. And then that inmate used the lock in the sock to strike Robert about the head. Now, for Robert's safety, it seems he was transferred to a different facility. Again, I saw a couple of different reports here, but this is the way that it looks. He was at Mohawk, and then they are sending him to Marcy. And by sending him to Marcy, it sent him to his eventual death sentence. On the morning of December 9th, Robert was transferred, And it's about a 30-minute drive that happened in the prison van. Arriving closer to midday, late evening, Robert underwent what kind of seemed like a standard intake process. I say that because we have some body cam footage that shows that there was irritation between the prison staff and Robert early on. But it's not like he's doing anything that's bizarre here. He's just doing the onboarding process of becoming a new inmate at Marcy. Now, part of this onboarding is that he would be frisked in the medical suite. It's just part of, hey, you're here, let's figure everything out. This shouldn't have gone awry because this process is repeated frequently at prisons. But body cam footage that was later released by New York Attorney General Letitia James, well, it captures an assault against Robert in chilling detail. With his hands cuffed behind his back and with him seated on the exam table, Robert was compliant, but some would say he seemed disoriented. Suddenly, in the video, Officer David Kingsley II punches Robert repeatedly, about 13 times to the face and head. All of this while others, including Officers Matthew Gallagher and Nicholas Kiefer, well, they do different things. Some officers are holding them down, Matthew and Nicholas, so they do some other stuff in the video. We'll get to that in a minute. What's important to know is that the room is full of officers and prison staff, and there's only one inmate, and he's getting beat. In some of the video, you can see that Officer Kingsley jumps on Robert's back, kind of like compressing his neck and his torso, and then other officers like kick him in the groin and the abdomen, and in a disturbing act resembling waterboarding, water was poured over his face while his mouth was covered. It seems that Robert gasps during all of it, and you can kind of understand what's going on, like he's going, I can't breathe, and then he goes limp. Now, remember, this was the third beating that Robert had had over the last week. Following all of that happened at Marcy, Robert was rushed to Wynn Hospital in Utica, and he was pronounced dead early on December 10th from asphyxia due to compression. His death was ruled a homicide by the medical examiner. Now, the incident ignited immediate backlash. 14 officers were placed on unpaid leave, and the Attorney General's Office of Special Investigation launched a probe. By late December of 2024, so just about 3 weeks after the beating, the body cam video was made public, drawing comparisons to the George Floyd case and fueling protests against prison violence. The Corrections Officers Union initially defended the actions as necessary, but public outcry led to indictments in February of 2025, so about 2.5 months after the incident. Robert's family, obviously devastated, spoke out for the first time on December 30th of 2024. They called his death a, quote, catalyst for change. Well, in January of 2025, they filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against the officers of the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision and also the staff seeking damages and systemic reforms. In a family statement, they wrote, quote, Robert was murdered, not just at the hands of these prison guards, but by a system of human caging that tears apart families. Well, let's fast forward. 10 months later, officers David Kingsley, Matthew Gallagher, and Nicholas Kiefer faced a jury trial for the murder of Robert Brooks. The trial focused on these 3 guards, but in total, 10 guards and staff were initially charged. 6 of those guards or staff members, well, they have pleaded guilty to lesser charges, some of them receiving sentences of up to 20 years in prison. Okay, that's important to note as we look at the trial of Kingsley, Gallagher, and Kiefer. Okay, remember, the evidence is strong here. We have video of the beating, and we have the prosecution arguing that the guards had tried to deactivate their cameras prior to the murder, but they weren't quite successful. They instead turned the cameras to a silent mode, so we have video but no audio. Now I'll have my producer and editor play still shots of the video on YouTube, maybe even run some of the video, and also you can see those still shots on the social media accounts. But because I did my due diligence, I watched the full 25-minute video that was released by Attorney General James. You guys, I was sick to my stomach when it was over. And I mean it, physically sick. The disruption between Robert and the guards starts outside of the facility. For some reason, Robert is having difficulty walking inside the facility. Now, this could be because he's doing the limp leg thing toddlers do when they don't want to go somewhere. It could be something Robert was doing. Or it could be that words were being exchanged and Robert was acting out. Whatever it was, he seems to be pepper sprayed while handcuffed. That's important here. He is handcuffed the entire time. Several guards watch as 3 guards handle Robert like a toy doll, carrying him face down, a guard on his left arm and shoulder, a guard on his right arm and shoulder, and a guard at his feet. When they place Robert in the infirmary on the table, and it's not done gently, it goes from bad to worse. One officer removes Robert's shoes and then repeatedly strikes Robert multiple times, bloodying his face. Robert seems to be speaking on and off. Remember, we can't hear what's being said because the cameras are on silent mode, but he's not yelling. I can tell you that for sure. My opinion, this guy is kind of dazed. I don't know if he's suffering from a head injury from the previous beatings, but he seems just kind of looped. And the guards, well, their behavior is gross. Occasionally, as Robert is assaulted, some guards laugh. 2 males, both part of the medical staff, well, they're standing outside the room, not intervening. At one point, Robert, who is still restrained by officers, is punched 3 times in his butt. Then it looks like an officer lifts his leg and slams his foot into Robert's genital area. And one officer, who did a lot of the hitting at one point, rips off his gloves and gets a new pair because his old gloves were covered in blood. Then something even more weird happens. Robert is sitting on the exam room table, beaten into submission. But they remove him from the table and they squish him up against the wall. And then the video jump cuts and Robert is back on the table in only his underwear. Up until that point, Robert had been in dark green like scrubs. I'm sure it's some kind of prison uniform. Now, at some point, the 2 male nurses, they enter the room and we get a real up-close view of one of the nurses' faces. This part of the video was disturbing to me. Well, let's be honest, the whole video was disturbing, but this one is disturbing in a different way. I believe this nurse knew Robert was in deep, deep trouble. His expression looks almost fearful as the nurse checks Robert's vitals. Now, Robert wasn't pronounced dead until 7 hours later at the local hospital in Utica. So I'll admit, I'm assuming a lot here. I'm just letting you know what I could see in that nurse's eyes. Now, during the trial, the special prosecutor, William Fitzpatrick, called the band of prison security a, quote, welcoming committee. He said the following: they killed him. The whole rotten, stinking, disgusting group of them. They all participated in it, and they killed that man. And you might think with that damning 25-minute video, what even is the defense attorney going to say? Well, Officer Gallagher's attorney contested that Gallagher didn't cause any of the fatal blows, that he was undertrained, and that all he did was follow commands on that evening, including getting some leg shackles for Robert. Gallagher's attorney said the officers who previously worked out their plea deals, well, he says they were responsible, and his client was just a newbie who was only doing what he was told. Officer Kiefer's attorney admitted that his client administered the pepper spray early on, but that didn't cause Robert's death. Kiefer's attorney said the special prosecution slapped the same charge on all 10 of the people, not caring who really did the killing. It was a see who pleads out and see who the jury will convict without really narrowing down those who administered the fatal blows that caused Robert to bleed from his broken nose and suffer severe injuries to his spleen, liver, and genital area. Those injuries were so severe, the medical examiner found that the blunt force trauma had caused blood to leak into Robert's lungs and stomach. Now, Officer Kingsley's attorney had a more difficult argument to make because the video shows Kingsley lifting Robert by the neck more than once. It's pretty gruesome to watch. Now, it's important to note that 2 of the officers broke the blue line during the trial, meaning those 2 had taken plea deals and they chose to go against the Brotherhood and testify against the 3, Officers Kingsley, Kiefer, and Gallagher. Well, the jury deliberated for 3 days before returning with mixed verdicts. Gallagher and Kiefer were acquitted of the 2 charges that each faced, the murder of Robert Brooks and first-degree manslaughter of Robert Brooks. But Officer Kingsley, who was seen manhandling Robert on the video, well, he was found guilty on both charges. Kingsley had been out on bail, and after the verdicts were read, he was handcuffed and led away to jail. Robert's family released a statement that read in part, "Today, the jury made the right decision in finding David Kingsley guilty of murder. While it was hard to see Matthew Gallagher and Nicholas Kiefer be given a pass, this verdict highlights the need for systemic change." Well, after the verdicts, Officer Gallagher did speak to reporters as he left the courtroom. He said that he was very appreciative of what the jury did and how they were able to deliberate and find him not guilty. Gallagher and Kiefer were cleared of any of their other charges of gang assault as well. There was a couple of different ones there. All of those went away. Now, prison reform advocates like Jennifer Skeef of the Correctional Association of New York, well, she welcomed Kingsley's conviction as rare accountability. But she said she was shocked by the acquittals, noting that in a region where prison work is culturally embedded, jurors might struggle to see guards' actions as criminal. Governor Kathy Hochul expressed disappointment in the acquittals, but reaffirmed commitment to reforms for safer facilities. And that's interesting because I'm going to get to Kathy Hochul in a minute. And the defense lawyers, well, they held the outcome as evidence against a, quote, gang mentality at Marcy. While Kiefer offered remorse to Brooks' family, saying, quote, "What happened to them is not something that a family should ever go through." Outside the courthouse, organizers like Thomas Gant from the Center for Community Alternatives decried the verdicts as reinforcing a system that protects its own. Kingsley will be sentenced in December. He faces a potential 25 years to life. And to close all of this out, Robert's son, Robert Jr., well, his approach has been calm and mature, yet forceful. He said the following, "We got 1 guilty on charges and 2 acquitted. I feel, as in the people that were acquitted, they were doing what their supervisors told them to do. And so I can't be totally mad at them, but I'm more mad at the system that allows that to go on." Now, Robert Jr. has helped push legislation that requires fixed cameras in all common areas of prison. That way, we would not be relying on body cam video that can be turned off or silenced. Hey, remember how I said we'd get back to Kathy Hochul? Well, there's a problem here with Governor Hochul. She has not signed that legislation. Some critics say she's trying to water down the legislation before she signs a final version. Whatever the politics, the part I can't get over is multiple men stood around and watched the beating occur. That's a culture that needs changed. Let me know what you think in the comments. And is it too early for a spooky Halloween story? One you've potentially heard before, but there's an update. The Candyman murder, or the Pixie Stick killer, the man who killed Halloween. All of those titles were given to Ronald Clark O'Brien from Deer Park, Texas. It was Halloween of 1974 when Ronald took his 2 children trick-or-treating in Pasadena, Texas. That's a nearby neighborhood. After visiting the home where the homeowner failed to answer the door, Ronald's anxious children skittered ahead of their father to the next house, excitedly searching for an answer to their trick-or-treat knocking. When Ronald caught up with his children and some other children, he had a surprise. Ronald produced 5 21-inch pixie sticks. Ronald claimed that the person who hadn't answered at the previous house finally opened the door and gave Ronald 5 pixie sticks to share with the trick-or-treating group. The thrilled children in the group each took one. His daughter took one, his son took one, and they had 2 friends with them. So that left Ronald with 1 pixie stick. And when they returned to their neighborhood with full sacks of candy, Ronald gave the 5th stick to a boy he recognized from the church that his family regularly attended. Before bed, Ronald's son Timothy asked to eat some of his spoils, the sugary haul that his night of door-knocking had produced. Timothy chose the large pixie stick. After some trouble extracting the powder, Timothy finally tasted what he expected to be sugary bliss, but instead he told his father it tasted bitter. Ronald got his son a drink of Kool-Aid, and minutes later, Timothy complained of stomach pain before running to the bathroom, where he vomited several times before convulsing in his father's arms. Timothy died en route to the hospital, just 1/2 hour after eating the pixie stick. Now, the death struck fear in the community, parents surrendering their children's candy hauls to authorities so that it could be checked for poison. Days later, Timothy's autopsy revealed that the pixie sticks powder had been laced with a deadly amount of potassium cyanide. But remember, there were 5 pixie sticks. Police had recovered the other 3, plus the one that Timothy ate. That left them with just 1. And when they tracked down the boy from the church, his parents found him asleep with a pixie stick nearby. They found out the boy had tried to open the packaging, but due to the staples that the poisoner had used to seal the pixie stick closed, well, the boy was luckily unable to eat the powder. When the pixie stick contents were examined, each stick could have killed 2 to 3 adults. That's how much cyanide was inside the candy. As the investigation progressed, police discovered that Ronald was in a bit of a financial mess. He owed over $100,000 in debt. If you compare that to today's money, that's more than $500,000. Ronald also was struggling to keep a job. He had worked for over 21 different companies in his adult years. And it seemed he was about to lose his current job at Texas State Optical, this over concerns that he had been stealing from his bosses. Ronald's car was about to be repossessed. He had defaulted on his house loan, as well as several other small loans. How was he going to dig himself out of this mess? Well, he had a plan. He took out life insurance policies on his children. Each child had a policy originated in early 1974, and then Timothy had a second policy that was originated in September, 1 month before Timothy's death. Police thought they had their killer, and they became even more sure of their theory when they discovered that Ronald had visited a chemical supply store in Houston, asking questions about cyanide. Well, on November 5th of 1974, Ronald was arrested and charged with capital murder and 4 counts of attempted murder. A jury took just 46 minutes to find Ronald guilty of all 5 charges. The jury then took 71 minutes to sentence Ronald to death by lethal injection. Ronald's wife divorced him when he was convicted and sentenced. She later remarried, and her new husband adopted Ronald's surviving daughter. All right, you guys, it truly was a different time back then. The killing of children was revolting to other inmates, and the prison chaplain reported to authorities that Ronald was friendless in jail, with most inmates disgusted by Ronald's presence. It took 9 years, appeals, and stays, but Ronald was killed in 1984 by lethal injection. During his execution, it is reported a crowd had gathered outside the prison with some chanting the phrase, "Trick or treat." All right, so where's the update? Well, Texas is at it again. This time it's Santa Fe, a small city of about 13,000 located in Galveston County. That's right there near the Gulf Coast. In a city that size, the local high school is the center of activity. And Santa Fe had been trying to heal from a shooting that occurred at the school back in 2018. Okay, so we're diverting from our Halloween story for a second. Back in 2018, a 17-year-old student had entered art classrooms and using a 12-gauge shotgun and a .38 caliber revolver, that student began firing at his classmates, ultimately killing 10, 8 students and 2 teachers. 13 others were wounded in that rampage. Law enforcement confronted the shooter in about 4 minutes after the first bullet was fired. The student and law enforcement exchanged fire before the student was taken into custody. Eventually, the student was found incompetent to stand trial due to mental difficulties, and he is still housed in a mental facility. And because you might be wondering, his parents were found not negligent for the circumstances surrounding the school shooting, even though the guns belonged to his father. All right, so that shooting had defined the small town of Santa Fe for the last 7 years. And like I said, they were working at healing and moving forward. Until the homecoming parade at the local high school. During the parade, participants on floats hurled handfuls of wrapped candies into the cheering crowds. Candies like Jolly Ranchers and Tootsie Rolls and Fruit Chews. Of course, younger kids collected bags full. Over the next few days, police started to receive concerning reports from parents. At least 3 families had reported finding sewing pins. These thin, sharp needles were embedded into the candy. One photo shared by law enforcement showed a blue-headed pin protruding from a red-wrapped Tootsie Roll. Clearly, that pin had been inserted deliberately. Thankfully, no injuries have been reported, and no kids bit into the tampered treats. But the potential for harm was chilling to the community. Imagine a child unwrapping a seemingly harmless candy only to prick their finger or worse, possibly swallow a pin. And then the public panic set in again, just like back in the 70s and 80s. At the time of this recording, no suspects have been identified, and police are scanning any available parade route footage to see if anything suspicious can be observed. I'll keep you guys posted on this one. But this had me thinking, if you are a parent, do you still allow your children to trick or treat? I have to admit my failures here. I rarely scanned my children's candy haul. I knew the houses they were visiting. It was a tight-knit neighborhood, and I would warn them to just be careful about what they ate. So it had me thinking, do I suck as a mom, or are more of you out there like me? And now, as I prepare to travel on Halloween to go trick-or-treating with my grandson, Asher, I guess maybe this is my warning to become more vigilant. Tell me where you land on the helicopter scale as a parent or a grandparent. Just let me know in the comments. And we'll close out today's crime news by telling you about the next Ocean's 11 installment of that movie franchise, except it's real life that reads like a screenplay. Just 3 days ago, on October 20th, the iconic Louvre Museum in Paris became the scene of a daring daytime jewel heist, thieves making off with priceless French crown jewels, all of it in under 10 minutes. Dubbed the heist of the century by French media, this brazen theft has left the nation reeling, evoking memories of past art crimes like the 1911 Mona Lisa theft. Now, it was a calm, kind of cloudy day in the City of Lights on Monday, where the world's largest art museum anchors the center of town. The former royal palace turned museum has a sprawling 783,000 square feet, and it houses 38,000 artifacts, exhibits from prehistoric times to modern day creations. And in 2025, post-pandemic crowds have surged back, with over 10 million visitors annually flocking to see masterpieces like the Venus de Milo and, of course, the Mona Lisa that was returned. Visitors had just begun quietly roaming the halls, pausing to admire exhibits, when these bold criminals enacted their plan. That morning, thieves pulled up to the Louvre's riverside facade in a white van equipped with what seems to be a common apparatus in Paris. It's a lift mounted to the back of the van that brings furniture up and down the sides of buildings to be removed and inserted when people are moving. 2 of the criminals stayed below on the ground near the van, while 2 other criminals jumped in the lift and ascended to the second floor window. Those 2 criminals, looking all official, pulled out tools and began cutting through the window to gain access to the building and to avoid being seen by security. The cutting of the facade caused alarms to blare, but unfortunately, the alarms weren't really taken that serious since the system had been malfunctioning recently. Once inside, the two criminals threatened 5 staff members who avoided the criminals and began evacuating visitors. In a frenzy, the duo smashed 2 high-security display cases, grabbing 8 19th century royal jewels adorned with thousands of diamonds and emeralds and sapphires. In their haste, they dropped Empress Eugenie's crown, which was later recovered damaged nearby. By 9:38 a.m., they descended the ladder, hopped on waiting scooters, and vanished into Paris traffic. Total time inside the building? 4 minutes. Now, these weren't just shiny costume jewelry pieces. The haul included Empress Eugenie's tiara and brooch. She was the wife of Napoleon III. Also, an emerald necklace and earrings from Empress Marie Louise, that's Napoleon's second wife. There was a sapphire tiara, a necklace, and an earring from Queen Marie Amélie. Hope I'm saying that one right. And Queen Hortense, and a very beautiful brooch. Crafted in the 1800s, these gems survived revolutions and wars, symbolizing imperial grandeur. Eugenie's crown, which, like I said, was dropped during the escape, well, it boasts 1,354 diamonds, 1,136 rose-cut diamonds, and 56 emeralds. All of this is a testament to the 19th century opulence that was sustained and treasured at the Louvre. Valued at an estimated 88 million euros, which, according to the BBC, is 102 million in America, they're truly priceless for not only their cultural significance, but their price tag. And they are impossible to sell intact without detection. Again, at least according to the BBC. Experts believe thieves likely plan to dismantle them, melting gold and recutting stones. The jewels are not privately insured, and their loss is a blow to France's heritage. As of right now, 60 investigators are on the case, poring over surveillance footage and questioning witnesses. A criminal organization is suspected to be behind the heist, and the Louvre is also under critical scrutiny. It is estimated that 1/3 of the rooms in the massive museum either lack cameras or the equipment is not functional. President Emmanuel Macron has promised changes and improvements amid the embarrassment. He's pledging about $800 to $900 million in promised project renewal. Now, ironically, after I had researched this story, but right before I recorded the podcast, a thief in a different Paris heist was captured in Barcelona, Spain. See, back in September, so just a month ago, the Natural History Museum suffered a break-in and over $1 million in gold was stolen. This happened in Paris also, just a month ago. Well, yesterday, a 24-year-old Chinese woman was arrested for that heist. She was caught with gold she had melted down from the heist and that she was then trying to sell in Spain. When she broke into that museum in Paris, it had the same kind of flavor as the Louvre break-in. Tools like a blowtorch and a grinder were used to cut through museum doors and also through the reinforced display cases. Paris seems to have some problems on their hands with security. Well, like I said, I got most of my research from the BBC for the Louvre story. I'll tell you, in America, news channels are calling these criminals things like stupid and sloppy and haphazard. These are all words I've heard in TV segments. I just have a question. If that's true, how did they get away with it? Was it just dumb luck? I feel like it's a super arrogant take here in America to call them sloppy. And maybe I'm wrong. If you're from France, weigh in on this one. And then I also was thinking, will Brad Pitt be starring as the tourist eating a croissant across the street from the museum, looking all innocent as he assesses the work his gang is completing? Does Julia Roberts make a cameo? And is George Clooney in prison again, but in France this time? Let me know in the comments. And now to end the podcast, let's look at some of the comments from Monday's episode. You guys were so nice about my blooper reel. Jesus deserves a medal for my bad days. But I have really great days too, and his work is easier on some of those days. His lift is a little lighter. I'm just grateful I have him. And to the great Uncrustable debate, I'm sort of shocked that so many of you chose Trader Joe's. And I'm just shocked because of ignorance. I don't have a Trader Joe's in my area, but I know people love the quirkiness of the items you can purchase there. Linda in the comments said she's surprised that Smucker's, with their immense success, feels the need to go after a smaller scale chain like Trader Joe's. And Abby brought it to my attention that a bakery brand called Rudy's, they're out of Boulder, Colorado. It took me a minute to find them. Well, they just started making their version of Uncrustables. They even call that version Copycat Uncrustables. Are they the next in line for a lawsuit? And finally, Tommy had good local insight on the Chance Engelbert story. They said that Scottsbluff and Gearing and Terrytown, well, they've visited those Tri-City areas multiple times on family visits to spend time with their abuelas. And they say it would be impossible to search and find someone out there, especially if they didn't want to be found. They also noted it's not the safest area in America, and walking alone wouldn't be the best of ideas. And I know I said that was the last thing, but over on Spotify, I wanted to shout out Erica and Caroline, and I hope it's pronounced Caroline. Some of my favorite comments are when people tell me how much they love Peyton and the efforts that both her and I try to enact in representing the victims. That's the reason we do this. The victims need voices, justice, and remembrance. And you guys, you are the ones who make it possible for us to do that. Okay, now I'm on a roll and I'm thinking, so this really is the last thing. On that note about us trying to bring remembrance and justice to victims, remember the story of Sheriff Mickey Steins and him shooting the judge, and it was all caught on camera in Kentucky? Well, just this morning, I watched a TikTok video of a young woman claiming to be Mickey's daughter. Now, I have no reason to believe it's not her. So, operating on that conclusion, she chose not to talk at all about the case or her father or the potential ways in which she's connected to that case. Instead, she trashed creators, people who have reported on the crime. She has the right, and I'll never take that away from her. This is her story. But I do hope she understands that respect is achieved in a lot of content creation. And it is very, very rare that I see anyone in my comment section destroying the victims of the crime. And I include her in that category. She has to suffer with the ripple effects of her father's choices, and that just kind of breaks my heart. I hope she can eventually find the ability to appreciate those who tried to empathize with her. And even the way we have empathized with Sheriff Mickey, I think we've shown him a lot of grace. Maybe she can get there someday. All right, that's your Thursday episode of Rise in Crime. Thank you for the case suggestions. You've given me a couple. I'm still researching a couple. Please send me more. Of course, I want to talk about the cases you're interested in. And we love 5-star reviews and positive comments here. Please like and follow on all of our social media and YouTube accounts that we have here at Oh No Media. That's Murder with My Husband, Into the Dark, and Rise in Crime. And there's Q saying goodbye. Join me again on Monday for more morning crime news. I'm Mama Jules. And keep safe out there.